Hello and welcome to the inaugural Bootleg Universe podcast. I am Sam Lasky, a writer and producer on Guardians of Justice and other Bootleg Universe productions. And with me...
I am Kenlon Clark. I'm a director, editor on Guardians of Justice as well. You may also recognize this voice if you've watched the show. Welcome to the inaugural Bootleg Universe podcast, where we have the opportunity to sit down and talk about everything you love, from video games, animation, comic books, movies, and just life.
We're talking about today about where Hollywood is at, the video game adaptation format is at. We're going to talk a little bit about how we got our starts, what it's like to be a filmmaker trying to break into the industry. Mm-hmm. And we are joined by our fearless leader, the creator of the Bootleg Universe, one Mr. Adi Shankar.
Hey, I'm Adi Shankar. Probably already know that because you're most likely watching this on a social media platform that has other stuff of me on it. But in the event that you, I'm Adi Shankar, and I'm having a great time. About to do a podcast with two of my favorite collaborators. There's like a ecosystem that's developed behind me and around me and with me, and I wanted to do a podcast with these two guys.
All right. Well, here we are, and
first podcast. I think a trope of a podcast is people spend like the first 10 minutes of a podcast meandering. Mm-hmm. And being like, so there are a lot of things that we want to maybe talk about that are very important. It's just so good to have you both here in front of me.
And we'll get to that in 25 minutes. But first, we're going to just randomly talk about who knows what.
So I think we should just start with a fucking question.
Mm-hmm. All right. So over the last 5 to 6 years, you've been sort of known as like the video game adaptation guru in Hollywood. How did that happen?
Well, I'm not. This is a perception that people have, and it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Right. But you definitely have a good handle, with video games and animation, those type of things.
Yes, but video games are not they're not all the same, right? So there's not like one way. There's not like a blueprint to adapt a video game, right? Mm-hmm. Like just like there's not a blueprint to adapting a book, like. A mystery thriller will be adapted very differently than like a Harry Potter, right? Mm-hmm. And so like, Mortal Kombat and Mega Man and Street Fighter are all three video games, but you would adapt them very, very differently.
What do you think had been going wrong with video game adaptations for, the first 20 or so years that Hollywood was making them? Was it a lack of respect for what they were? Was it just a generation gap between like baby boomer executives versus a medium that's for a younger generation? What went wrong?
It was literally those two things. Also, I think there's an issue with the apparatus that governs what gets made in film. And how that gets made, right? So movies back in the day were all driven by movie stars. Movie stars literally dictated what people went and watched. It's no longer the case. IP tends to be more of a driver of that. So that shift has put video games in kind of a prime spot because it's IP. It's IP that people know, and it's IP that people are attached to. So there's a lot of like inertia and energy behind video games as an industry.
So even without the generational shift of who the executives are in Hollywood, there's now purely for mercenary monetary reasons, there's respect.
Yeah.
For the video game.
Yeah, because industry. the audience is all playing video games. So there's like there's a brand awareness on a scale that simply didn't exist when we were young, right? Like video games were like kind of a nerdy thing outside of like Mario Kart and maybe Zelda, right? now, like, definitely pre-pandemic, during and post-pandemic, kids are just playing video games all day. Like, that's how they relate to one another. This is how they hang out. It's no longer hanging out in shopping malls. It's hanging out on Fortnite or PUBG or or like kind of all being in some Twitch room.
Yeah. Because even with that new cultural and industry respect for the medium, there's still, you know, a different type of storytelling in video games than you brought up the example of you adapt a Harry Potter differently than a mystery book.
Yeah.
But books, for the most part, still have that A to B to C story structure, the same as movies and TV shows. Video games aren't necessarily governed by that. Some are.
Some are, exactly. Some are.
But if you're taking, you know, Super Mario Brothers, just to take the example, it's not there's rescue the princess from the bad guy, but there's also magic mushrooms and Koopas and all this stuff that aren't an easy adaptation. So when you're looking at video games that you might want to bring to the big screen or the small screen for Netflix, what do you look for? Does it already have to have that narrative base, or is it purely the beauty of the game, the viability of the IP? What are you looking for?
Just something that I care about.
Okay.
You know, because and you bring up an interesting point, which is something that which is a lot of times like the first thing I will kind of get into in a story room or a pitch meeting, which is sometimes games have all lore and very little story. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Sometimes games will just be like a really great gameplay mechanic, and people are obsessed with the gameplay mechanic, but there isn't like lore or like a real like story behind it. There isn't like iconography which people are like emotionally attached to, right? And sometimes games are literally just built, it's just like a single character. People care about this one character, and then this character goes and like does a bunch of things. And all of those, I guess, variables completely, I don't want to say they dictate how you would go about adapting, and sometimes it's not adapting, sometimes it's translating, sometimes it's like expanding, sometimes it's like an expansion, right? And sometimes it's and sometimes people are making like transmedia content. You know, you're making something like adjacent to the game. So the point is, there's just like an infinite number of ways to do it, and there's no right way, there's no wrong way.
Well, the late great Roger Ebert, who
right.
I'll quote now, was famous. Roger Ebert, the late great Roger Ebert, may he rest in peace, was famously quoted once as saying that the reason why comic book movies work and video game movies don't as often is because comic books are based on characters and video games are based on action scenes. Now, this was like 20 years ago, so a lot's evolved, but how do you overcome the push of aesthetic with a video game?
I think that's something that a person of a different generation would say, mm-hmm. and I understand the thought process there, mm-hmm. right?
Yeah, Ebert famously also said that video games cannot be art, right. Which I think is being proven wrong every day.
Uh-huh.
But it's like, okay, well, I mean, then my response to that, if I was talking to Roger Ebert, I would just say, okay, well, fine. And I even disagree with the notion that video games are just action scenes. But let's go with that for a second. It is an action scene. Great. Cool. Movies have action scenes. They also have other scenes. So you just kind of put the action scene and you build everything else around it.
Right.
Whatever.
When they start when they start planning the most recent Mission Impossible movies, they start with the stunts.
Mm-hmm.
What towering thing can we dangle Tom Cruise off of?
Right.
And then you work backwards from there to construct the story.
Yeah. And action movies are a respectable genre as well. So it's not like there's anything wrong with, it's just action scenes, you know? Mm-hmm. It's some of the best movies ever and the most profitable movies ever are action movies.
Right. Mm-hmm. I mean, Raiders of the Lost Ark, Mad Max Fury Road
yeah.
are just, one series of, just a long series of action beats.
Yeah.
Right? For the most part, with a story in there to hold it together. But we consider those to be masterpieces.
I think there's another nuance to all of this, which maybe it's talked about, maybe it's not. I have no idea. The nuance, though, is the games industry comes at Hollywood with not that Hollywood doesn't exist, but anyways, the game industry comes to let's come up with another word instead of Hollywood, like the narrative movie TV business with a ton of leverage. Like just a ton of leverage, right? Because like they don't need the movie to exist.
Right.
Harry Potter was great. Harry Potter became a bigger deal because once there was a movie and that. So it's like the publishing industry, the comic book business needs the movie business. The video game business does not need the movie business. So that there's like a natural there's an organic friction that happens there that sometimes results and I'm skipping over like the nuance of it, but that friction sometimes results in movies coming out that are not great.
So why does the video game industry come to the storytelling industry then? What does Konami or Ubisoft want to get out of a business deal with someone in Hollywood to make content based on their IP?
So again, because this has been happening since, call it like the 90s, right? So, and I think that perspective, that point of view has likely changed. I mean, not likely, it has changed. There was like a different there was a different equation in the 90s, a different equation in the 2000s, and a different equation last decade, and a different equation now, right? Because now the video game industry has surpassed Hollywood. The budgets for games are far exceed the budgets for most movies and TV shows. I think maybe in the 90s, I'm pontificating. I'm guessing it was likely there was like a prestige element. Okay, well, we got a movie made, and we're still like this emerging business. Again, video games were not big business in the 90s. They were meaningful to our generations, but they weren't like massive. Hey, we're gonna like IPO this company, and then like all these hedge funds are gonna try to like weasel their way in, kind of situation. And I think the power dynamic shift happened last decade when video games just simply became tech. They just became a not just a node of tech. They became like their own vertical, like a parallel lane of tech, right? And this had been happening for a long time. Like Steve Jobs gets a lot of credit for handheld devices and putting things in your pocket, but like Nintendo was doing it at the same time with the Game Boy, right? So the gaming industry was always tech. It's just kind of happening in parallel paths, and then I think once we started getting these like juggernaut gaming titles like Grand Theft Auto,
well, like
Call of
Halo,
Duty,
the
Halo.
fact that Microsoft invested so heavily in creating Xbox.
Exactly. Right. And that's like Microsoft. Yeah. Microsoft is not impressed or scared of Paramount Studios.
Do you think that, obviously movies or cinema, you could say, was the dominant art form of the 20th century.
Yeah.
Have video games already replaced them, or do movies still stand a chance of being the kind of cultural milestones that they have been over our lifetime?
That's a great question. I don't think, and I would love your guys' perspective on this, but I think we live in like a decentralized media ecosystem world that's only going to get more decentralized as time goes on. And I don't think there's like a dominant anything.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, so I think there is still with video games a barrier to entry for a lot of audiences. You have to know how to use a controller. You have to be good enough with a keyboard and a mouse to play PC games. Whereas there's no barrier to entry for watching a movie or a TV show.
That's true.
I disagree with you on that.
Okay.
And here's why. Mobile gaming. Mobile gaming is like super intuitive. And you're seeing this in third world countries. Like in third world countries where most people did not have computers. They did not have the PC. They didn't have the laptop. All of a sudden, people are getting handed mobile phones. Mm-hmm. They're playing games because the games are super intuitive. Because it's just literally just, oh, I touched that.
Right.
Not a AAA gaming experience, but the indoctrination's happening on the indoctrination's happening at scale.
Right. And I think there will come a point where you can play Call of Duty or Halo or one of these AAA game titles on your phone, but we're certainly not there yet.
Yeah. But again, I think this is like a nanosecond away, right? Like Fortnite's a mobile game. PUBG's a mobile game. Mm-hmm. I mean, PUBG's is the biggest deal ever in India. And this is a country that has like minimal penetration of consoles.
Yeah. By the time this podcast is released, they'll have figured it out.
Yeah.
So.
No, but like literally, I mean, PUBG was such a big deal in India, that the Prime Minister of India literally talked about it on, TV.
Wow.
Right.
As a good or a bad thing. Was he like, this is ruining our children, like the evangelicals were saying in the 90s in America?
It was kind of more that, but what was interesting is about like even the phraseology, right? Because again, in India, generation upon generation has been skipped. Mm-hmm. So it's not like, oh, we had then, Warcraft and then this and then that. It's like, how in America the Kleenex is really the brand,
right?
But people call it a Kleenex, even though it's what's the
tissue,
the bath tissue, I think is the technical term, but it became Kleenex. Or inline skating became rollerblade. People just call it rollerblade. Mm-hmm. PUBG is so massive that he just called gaming PUBG in a sense.
Wow.
What's the difference? This is probably going to be a bit of a weird question, but in terms of adapting, say, a video game to a movie or a TV show, as opposed to, I'll compare it to comic books. With video games, you have like, everybody has kind of their own experience with it because it's so interactive as a medium. Whereas I'll say with comic books, it's not that it's not interactive, but everybody kind of has the same experience to some degree. You might emotionally react differently to something, but you're not going down a different path of adventure. Whereas
I disagree with that.
Yeah, I think it depends on the game.
Yeah,
certainly.
Right, of course.
Right. But even the assessment of comic books.
Right, but you could say, like, you're going, okay, this is a very Frank Miller. Batman's a terrible example to use because he's so able to interpret in so many different ways.
Right, because your version of Batman could be entirely different from my version of Batman, based on the comic books we've read, when we came into the series, what movies or TV shows were coming out when we were kids.
Mm-hmm. I'm just saying that like there's I think a slightly more interactive element to video games as a medium than a novel or a comic book. And when you're going to adapt something, now you have subconsciously the audience is all going to have a little bit more of a different version. I'm not saying that that's true. I'm just saying it feels like something, if you were called upon to adapt something, you would be like, is everybody having a slightly different experience?
Okay.
With this,
but again, just to battle test the statement, like the thesis of what you're saying, mm-hmm. right? Let's say tomorrow the three of us were asked to adapt X-Men. Okay, mm-hmm. What is X-Men? Is it like a family drama about a bunch of people there?
Versions from you guys,
right? Is it like a family drama about people? The mm-hmm. thing is it like a psychological thriller about this like telepathic guy who's like tricking all these people into doing his bidding?
Mm-hmm. Is it the Wolverine show with a supporting cast?
Totally.
Right.
Is it like this human rights allegory? Mm-hmm. Is it really like your ultimate science fiction soap opera? Mm-hmm. Because you can argue that there's like X-Men before Days of Future Past and then X-Men post Days of Future Past, which was like completely different. And then you look at like comics, and I think what you're tapping into here is something like Batman, something like X-Men, has like this really deep deep reservoir of lore to draw off of, right? So you're not just like making stuff up, even if you are, because like you look at like Matthew Vaughn's X-Men First Class, which I loved, and I thought it was so dope. There's an element of it that's fan fiction, right? Because he's like drawing, this character and that character who really in the comics were not there at the same time, but it's like fine, we accept it as
Havoc. Havoc's here in the beginning, yeah.
So there's just like this deep reservoir in comic books, and the thing that I look at when I look at like all the Batman, everything that's been made, Batman doesn't exist. There's no such thing as Batman, right? All these are just completely different characters, different expressions. These are completely different things that are all under this umbrella of a brand called Batman, right? Yeah. And that ends up being the thing that draws people in. Because games are newer, you don't have that deep reservoir in the same way.
Right. Okay. Does that make sense? Yeah, that totally makes sense. The mythology is still, being built in some ways, and so the ability to interpret it or adapt it kind of has that flexibility as opposed to some degree, like a character like Batman, I suppose. But
and the game industry has like also fallen into the trap of like the Hollywood trap, where the budgets are growing. Like everything has to be a colossal hit, so they're like really focused on like sequels. And again, gamers are more okay with sequels than movie people. Movie people are like, oh my god, everything's a sequel, remake. Game people are like, bring on the sequel. In fact, they're like mad that there are not more sequels. But what comic books do and what books do, which is interesting, is like pivot genre. Because they have to, right? Yeah. Like, sometimes Batman's a detective story, i.e. Detective Comics. Sometimes it's more of an action thing. When Batman and Superman team up and there's like a Justice League book, it feels more like Fast and the Furious. Yeah. Right? Even X-Men, right? Like if you go back to like the early 2000s, X-Men was so big. You had like the Uncanny X-Men, New X-Men, and Extreme X-Men. These were 3 concurrent X-Men titles being released every few weeks, all with different creative teams, but also like different tones, different types of stories. Even one character like Spider-Man, right? So with the X-Men, they split the X-Men up into different teams. One was like more of a relationship drama. One was more of like an action thing. One was more of a satire. But even like Spider-Man, right? You'll have like 3 Spider-Man books, sometimes more, that, some are more character Peter Parker driven. Some are more like action driven, right? And so I'm not saying this is good or bad. It's just the comic book industry has taken the IP and kind of morphed it into other things to expand it. The games business hasn't. The games industry is like flirted with that, but ultimately, like Mortal Kombat is a fighting game, right? There have been expressions of Mortal Kombat back in the day that were like, one was like more of like an RPG adventure game, and you have like one-off experiments like that. But also, it's just the games industry is like hyper locked into the engine, the engine, because again, the engines are expensive, right? The actual like development of the mechanics are what makes the game great. The lore is what like creates the emotional attachment. But if you have a great lore, a great world, and it's like amazing, but the game doesn't work, then everyone bolts, right? No one just stays for good lore. So yeah.
So like in the way, so kind of like what you're saying, like in the way, like say Ant-Man, to use that as an example, kind of brought in a little of like a fun heist flick.
Right.
Like the video game could get to a point where you're doing Ocean's 11 with Street Fighter or Mortal Kombat.
But it's harder to do because that game development process is a huge risk in a way, because some people are just showing up for the fighting game mechanic.
Right. Yeah. Right. If you suddenly change the mechanic, it's a different game. There's no reason necessarily why somebody wants to see the Mortal Kombat characters in an Ocean's 11 heist game.
Right. But now that we've
We
said
would.
it, now
We
that we've
would.
said it,
All
we
right.
want to see
No,
it.
I'm all about that, right? And then you have like some franchises like Resident Evil that have flirted with that, like created the survival horror genre. And then after Resident Evil 4 or 5, after they started feeling more of like action games and less of survival horror, they started feeling like just action blockbuster games. And then 7 swung the pendulum way back and became like terrifying, especially in VR. Yeah, I'm like, whoa, I can't. This is too much. Terrifying. Or even like Devil May Cry, right? Like Devil May Cry. I don't know if you guys know this or are really familiar with Devil May Cry, but it started off as a Resident Evil spinoff.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
Like in its development cycle, that's what it was like a more action oriented Devil May Cry, or Devil May Cry was a more action oriented Resident Evil, and then once you start messing with the mechanics, then all of a sudden it just kind of organically you're like, well, we're gonna just then maybe they can just kind of hyper fight in slow mo, and then you end up creating a whole new IP.
You might as well call it a new thing and start a new franchise
Exactly.
than disappoint the fans who are expecting the Resident Evil style gameplay.
Right. And this is a weird it's a weird thing because you guys know this. I used to teach branding, and like advertising, and one of the core things that you learn when you do a case study of really any company, the more specific a brand is, the better. The more hyper focused a brand is, the better. So like Skittles could make cereal tomorrow, and it'll be like a really fun like novelty experiment. But over time, but only as a novelty thing, right? All of a sudden, if Skittles is making cereal, there's like market confusion. Another example of this is if like Ferrari tomorrow released a $50,000 car or a $20,000 car, whatever, it would just blow up. People would go nuts. But then as time goes on, it erodes the meaning of Ferrari, and it's now lost its meaning, right, for this short spike. So I think there is like this, again, friction between like managing a brand, i.e. Street Fighter, innovator in the fighting game genre, and then things that the people like us who are like just creative types who are like, oh, wouldn't it be cool if this one thing, but it really erodes the brand. You know what I mean? It's like look, like I want to, yeah.
So, go ahead.
I mean, to bring it back to Hollywood, I mean, this is part of why Disney has been so successful.
Yes.
In a market that has changed so much over the last 40 years, because people know what a Disney movie is.
They have an actual brand
Right.
in an industry full of companies that run around thinking they have a brand.
Nobody knows what a Universal movie is or a Warner Brothers movie,
Fast and
except for.
Furious.
Well, I was going to say, except for us film nerds, where I can be like, well, in the 30s, Warner Brothers was the one who made gangsters.
Right.
And Universal made monster movies.
It's the horror, monster movies. Paramount was like adult dramas.
Right.
But no, I mean, you're absolutely right. Disney has a brand, and it's a brand that means something to a lot of people, not just the executives who work there who tell themselves it means something,
How far can they push that brand? Because like when they're taking in things like, to use Disney as an example, Star Wars or Marvel, essentially they're going to amalgamate, those things into the Disney brand. Like how far could they push it out without?
Okay, so I'm totally taking the creative thing out of my brain, like, right? Because if you put me in charge of Marvel, like it just goes dark like that,
Yeah.
Like,
we know.
Like, yeah, it just goes dark, and like the audience is like, why did everyone get decapitated? It's like, look, so removing my creative instincts, like just throwing them out the window for a second. From like a brand management perspective, you don't want to stretch a brand, because the idea is to like own a space, right? It's like, it's like think of it as a country or like a town. Like, okay, you own this space, you own the resources, focus on what you have, and you want like depth within the brand. The more you try to stretch and you start invading other things, right? Like it just takes you away from your core competency, and it just never works in the long run.
This is, this is why Marvel and Star Wars both, I would say a large extent, not perfectly, but to a large extent, fit within the Disney brand framework.
Yes.
Because it is still about creating entertainment that a 5-year-old can go see with their grandparents and everybody have an equally good time.
Right. And the thing is and Disney and Star Wars is probably a good example to some extent, because when they bought Star Wars, my family, they're big Disney people.
Yeah.
And I would be like, you guys will love this, because what's Disney? It's knights and monsters and princesses and all that. I'm like, take that and put it in space, and you basically have Star Wars. So it really kind of fit within, that kind of realm. So thinking of, let's say, young creators or people who are trying to kind of, get their foot in the door with things, do you recommend that they take that branding approach in the sense of like, I want to be this guy?
Okay. If you haven't had a hit yet, or you haven't made anything, I think you should just try everything, right? What you don't want to do is be Atari.
Okay.
Because Atari should be Nintendo. Mm-hmm. But the people that ran, there's articles that they did this whole press tour by saying, we are not a video game company. We are a consumer electronics company.
Oh, yeah.
And there was a whole thing, we are not a this, we are that. And you're like, okay, congratulations. You will be like a logo on a t-shirt.
Right.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, hey, remember that company? It's better to once something pops, just kind of stay in that lane and just keep going down that road, because that road will create opportunities.
But for the young person who hasn't sold the script or had the film come out yet,
try everything.
Yeah.
Try everything.
Yeah.
Because one of the biggest mistakes I made early on in my career when I first got reps was, oh, you have a really good action comedy. We're going to send you to every production company that does action comedies, and that's all you're going to pitch on. That's all you're going to do. And it's like, well, no, I kind of just wrote this one action comedy that everybody likes.
Right. It's funny because it's kind of like, obviously actors, to make a comparison, they don't want to be typecast.
It's the greatest thing. It's the greatest thing. That's the problem. This is where the friction is in our planet, right? Like, creative people want to push the boundaries. Everyone else has an evoked set. When you say, and that's a technical term, evoked set. So when I say luxury cars, like sports cars, 3 names come to mind, right? Ferrari, Lamborghini, Porsche. There's others, but that's the evoked set, right? And you want to be in the top 3 of an evoked set. And the thing is, you got to kind of reverse engineer that after you've had some success. So in that situation, right? Shane Black was the action comedy guy, right? And then you get a little success, you get a little more success, and now all of a sudden you're like,
my point was more that before I had, because that script never sold,
right,
and I never got any of those jobs, I was telling my reps, hey, I actually really like writing horror movies. I really like writing R-rated ultra-violent stuff, like what we do.
Right. And
they were like, no, don't do that. Don't waste your time. You're this, and you're this from now on.
Yeah. No, it's. On some level, they're right. It's like just pick not just a lane, pick like a molecule within a lane, and just really just tell everyone this is it. Because the other person who's receiving that information, they're going, oh, this guy's focused, and then they think that you're an expert in that. They're like, oh, this person's so committed to doing contained psychological horror dramas. They think that oh, this person's an expert in this thing. So when they're looking at a list of writers, right? There's oh, this guy and that guy, this girl and this guy. Oh, but this person is the expert in this exact thing.
So I guess
the space.
I guess this goes back to what you said right off the bat, which is about the perception of you as the video game adaptation guru is kind of a fiction, but it's an important fiction for your career, that people believe that about you.
Yeah.
But you do know a lot about video games.
Yeah, I do, but I'm also not like going out challenging people's. Okay, look, here's the deal, right? I think you guys are very, and I think most creative people, but especially like really good creative people, are very introspective, self-aware, sensitive.
Maybe to a fault,
right?
In some of our cases.
Yeah. So you understand how three-dimensional you are, right? The rest of the world views everyone else in 2 dimensions, and I think that's part of the friction that happens in like life. Like you are like, I'm this complicated 3-dimensional person, but everyone else is running around kind of labeling you as this 2-dimension. Oh, that's Sam. He's funny and he writes action comedies. And he likes cats, like, or whatever that thing is. And you're like, I don't just like cats, I also like llamas. And they're like, what? You just confused me. I don't understand.
No, I mean, it's mainly the cats, though.
Right.
Yeah. I'm glad that's the second thing that comes to mind about me.
Yeah.
I feel like maybe I've devoted too much of my personality to my my adorable kitties, like Odysseus and Penelope.
Yeah.
Like when I so when I first started doing this, like I straight up wanted to do like comedies. I wanted to be like a stand-up comedian. I thought I was like really funny. But then I found myself in the action lane. I'm like, okay, cool. So I changed my Twitter bio to say I make R-rated, ultra-violent action movies. And then I put a photo of myself on Twitter of like the guy that would then make R-rated, ultra. You know what I mean? I'm just like, okay, this is the character I have to step into now. Okay, cool. We'll do this.
So in a weird way, it's almost like how important is, this is going to sound weird, but a persona, that you're creating around your work, like that you have an identity, you're creating an identity so that people can understand, your work.
Yeah. I think this is like kind of a hack for life, like Elon Musk, he's like always playing the smart guy. I'm sure there's things that he's like not smart at, right? But he's running around being like Iron Man / guy with insights on how to fix things. Yeah, and this is a character, right?
Insightful Iron Man.
So then you end up with like evoked set. Oh, we have a problem. Light bulbs suck, and then everyone's like, then the natural inclination then for the population is like, oh, I wish Elon Musk would tackle the light bulb problem. So he's taken over I wish Apple would make cars and Apple would make TVs and Apple would make cameras and, why doesn't Apple become a monopoly and take over everything? Like, so, I think everything's like persona, right? Like, I mean, freaking Steve Jobs, like, why did he dress like that? Literally, why was he dressing like that?
Yeah, because it made it so easy to kind of like, you almost have to allow a certain level of yourself to be compartmentalized, because the human brain likes to compartmentalize, which I think is kind of like what you're saying.
Yeah.
And the easier you can allow that to happen and be, I'll say, cool with it, and also make it work for you creatively, like that's like a great cross section of like everything.
Totally.
If you're, if you become the guy who, you're now known for, you managed to direct Terms of Endearment or on Golden Pond, but you really want to make Michael Bay action films, then, it's going to be tricky.
I'm just picturing James L. Brooks's Transformers.
Yeah, but the point
I
is,
would watch that.
The point is, you have no control over anything, right? Like, you may want things, but you have no control. I mean, you can work hard, but that you still have no control over that happening.
Yeah.
The universe may present 15 other opportunities, right? So like, the people that close those doors because they want this, well, that's that's ego.
Like when I was doing music videos,
right.
Which I enjoyed, and it was a great kind of, we'll say, film school and those type of things. Like but in your mind, you're like, well, I'm doing this because I'm going to learn a lot about filmmaking, and it just is like these very short, intense experiences. But you don't kind of realize that, you're now the music video guy, and if you wanted to make, movies or TV or whatever, you're going to have to like now almost go back to square one and kind of show people to some degree what you can do.
And there are a lot of filmmakers who fall into the only doing music video trap.
Or only doing commercials. I don't know if it's a trap. It's like it's
yeah.
only a trap.
It's only a trap if you want to do the other thing.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing wrong with being a music video director or a commercial director.
I think it's great.
Yeah.
I think it's great. Like
they have a lot more money than I do,
and the innovation. The innovation comes from horror movies and music videos.
Yeah, that's not to take away from music videos or anything like that, but I do remember like David Fincher saying once in an interview that like when he was doing visual effects with ILM, he was like he always was chasing movies, but then he got into commercials and then he got into music videos and then he so there was always that like trying to get there, but at the same time, like you're saying, life has it. You can plan, but life is going to present opportunities, and you kind of have to try and make those work.
And life doesn't give a fuck about your plan.
Right, exactly.
Right.
What plan?
And the thing that fucks you is if you care about your plan so much that you're not engaging with the doors that are opening around you.
Neither one of us thought, 3 years ago that we were going to be working on Guardians of Justice.
Well, I'll say this. When I was but a wee child,
okay,
I always wanted to do superhero stuff. When I was 10, I made superhero movies. When I was 15, I was making animations on a whiteboard. When I went to film school, my film project was a superhero thing. I was way ahead of the curve, everybody. No, I'm just kidding. But so in a weird way, working with you has been a fulfillment of dreams because there's also that kind of, I'll just say like the pull of the universe somehow that also, if you do have that kind of aspiration or something, like it can kind of roundabout guide you, but it is going to
it's not a direct thing, it's a thing.
So Ken, let's take it a couple steps back for you.
Okay.
You're coming out of film school, you've done some shorts. How did you first get gigs directing music videos, and what was the scale when you were starting out? Was it like your friend had a band and you shot something for $100?
The very short, quick story is I never considered doing music videos, and I was like zero contacts, didn't know anybody, all of that type of situation, and I was doing other things. I'm trying to think. I moved down from Canada after film school. I did like a tourism video for my hometown right after film school because I was like, well, that's kind of filmmaking, so I'll make a tourism video. And then I moved down here from Canada, and I heard a young man singing in an apartment one night. It was like a get-together, and he had the voice of an angel. And I was like, I'm gonna make a music. Dude, let's make a music video together. And so I searched around for different recording studios, and then got one. And then as we're recording the song that he sang, I told the producer what I was doing, and he's like, "Oh, can you do a music video for my son?" And he was a rapper. And then that just kind of like all of a sudden snowballed, and I was making a lot of low budget music videos, and then eventually I got to do some really great ones for a group called Above and Beyond, and that was a lot of fun. But yeah, so it kind of was accidental. I heard someone sing and had the thought I should do a music video for this guy.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
And so I'm guessing this was like in the 1980s.
The 1960s. His name was Ricky Nelson.
How long into that?
Oh yes, steamy Ricky Nelson.
Yes,
I remember him.
Steamy Ricky Nelson.
How long into that process before you started to actually put money in your own pocket?
Well, there's putting money in your pocket and like I'll say paying your bills, and then there's like making good money. I mean, it was like more like you're working with a lot of independent artists.
Right.
So your budgets are gonna be, very flexible. And so a little while, but I would always be doing other things at the same time. So I was doing editing jobs. I would, it was a bit of the fractured approach, because you're just trying to figure out what thing is gonna kind of land for you on some level. All the while I was always writing screenplays.
Right.
And that's kind of how we all met is through writing. So I'm glad that I never, even when I was editing and making these music videos and stuff, I was always writing my own scripts, dreaming of making my own
you
film
were putting as many possibilities out into the universe as possible.
Yeah.
What's amazing about you, one of the many amazing things about you is you have a command over every piece of the process, and that I don't see that a lot anymore. Or really ever, there'll be people who are like hyper focused on like one or two pieces of the process. You use the tools available to you to like learn everything, so you can soup to nuts make something completely by yourself, which is not necessary, but helps make something cool when there's scale involved, because then you can be like, okay, well, I would edit it like that, and then you can speak editor to an editor. You can speak DP to a DP. You can DP is a director of photography. You can speak. You can just speak to people.
Yeah. I mean, I remember there was a point when we were doing reshoots on Guardians where.
It wasn't reshoots, dude. It was additional photography.
Okay. Additional photography.
Reshoots makes it sound like this was like X-Men Origins Wolverine. And the studio was like...
Rewind.
The studio was like, well, we don't like this movie. We need a completely different ending.
When we were doing additional photography on Guardians of Justice, there was a sequence that we were shooting, and someone said to you, I don't think this is going to cut together, but... because you think like an editor in addition to being a director, you managed to get the exact right shots to make that sequence work.
Yeah.
Rather than just getting a bunch of coverage and hoping for the best.
Right. As Werner Herzog says, we are not garbage collectors. It's kind of that. I think editing is like, in many ways, I mean, when you sit in the editing room, which we've all done together, it teaches you so much about every other aspect of filmmaking, because everything is kind of like headed to that moment where you're all going to be sitting there editing and trying to make things work. And so you learn a lot about what worked, what didn't, and what could be, how you can manipulate the footage and do all of those type of things. And it's like John Sayles, I think, was quoted once as saying, here comes my quote, Sam. As
just a quote machine today. Did you memorize these before we came here?
I was listening to just quotes on the whole way over. I'm attributing this to John Sayles, but he used to say that once you shot your movie or whatever, you only respond to footage. Like, so you don't necessarily have to, not to take away from writing or anything like that, but you don't go back to, right. You don't have to go back, you don't go back to the script or look back at the script. You're kind of reacting to the footage constantly. But, also, it's just learning those little tips and tricks that you can make almost anything work in the edit if you need to. And I love to plan, as you guys know, but even, no matter what, there's always going to be things that you're going to have to adapt when you get to the editing, the editing room and stuff like that. So, I would recommend editing to everybody if you really want to write.
Yeah, something that Tarsem Singh, you guys know that? Tarsem. The thing
Immortals.
Tarsem used to just drop so much wisdom. Really grateful for that dude. One of the things he told me was every director should come from editing. That's what should happen, right? Because editors make good directors, but that doesn't happen because writers are the ones who gain enough clout or enough leverage, but then they'll be like, well, if you want my next script, I have to direct it. Or actors. Actors are like, well, if you want a Kevin Costner movie starring Kevin Costner, it'll have to be a Kevin Costner film. And then,
Well, and I think oftentimes a big problem with some movies is that the directors aren't thinking spatially about how you transfer the audience from one shot to the other visually. And so they just get everything, and then it's a mess in the edit, and they say it's a poorly edited movie when in fact the footage just was never there.
Right. Yeah, totally thinking of exactly what you're saying, like your shot. And that is an ongoing, I think, thing, no matter how experienced you are as a director or filmmaker, you're always trying to push yourself of like, and Addie has, said that to me, like, really, think about your shot selection and those type of things, like, and so that way you're not just necessarily, you always want to have that leeway of like, we're going to just shoot some things because we don't know where we're going to use it. But at the same time, trying to think very like, the geography.
Well, it was like, again, the people that I learned from, Wayne Kramer.
Mm-hmm. Pawn Shop Chronicles.
And Running Scared.
Yeah.
And The Cooler. Obviously Joseph Kahn. Phil Joannou, who did
3 O'Clock High.
3 O'Clock High.
What a classic.
Phil Joannou was Steven Spielberg's protege. It was his first protege.
That movie is, sorry, not to interrupt, but that movie, if people haven't seen 3 O'Clock High, hunt it down. That is like an Edgar Wright film from the 1980s.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's Barry Sonnenfeld is the director of photography.
Did he shoot that?
Yes. So
Wow.
it's got like this early Coen brothers like aesthetic that's so wonderful.
So cool. My sister's an extra in that movie.
Oh,
Really?
Yeah.
What?
Okay.
In one of the hallway openings.
Okay, well, I know what we're doing tonight. We're watching that movie, and you're pointing it out.
The first thing that all these guys, like, I wouldn't say the first thing that I picked up or learned from pretty much all these guys, so every single one of them, was a lot of them would say like, hey, it's weird, like directors are very flashy now, but they don't have the fundamentals.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't know what they were talking about. And I'm like, what does that mean? And it was that. It was exactly that. It was that most movies were being kind of created by or shot by the studio.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We're going to shoot all the coverage. We're just going to shoot a master of a scene and then the close-up, mid, and then so that when we get into the editing room, there's an infinite number of options.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So the studio can come in and be like, no, we don't like that. Okay, right? But the old school masters were not making films like that. Like, there was a shot design, right? There, the where the camera moved and where the cut was, and that in and of itself was telling a story.
Right. Hitchcock could fall asleep on set because he had already made the movie. It was already storyboarded, and it was going to be edited exactly like that.
Yeah.
I mean, Ken and I are both gigantic fans of the Eon James Bond franchise. Mm-hmm. And one of the smartest things that the Broccoli's did to maintain consistency and to make sure that every movie in that franchise rose to some level of visual coherence and competence is they would graduate their editors to second unit action directors or directors of the movie. So Peter Hunt, who edited all the Sean Connery Bond movies, graduated to the director of On Her Majesty's Secret Service, which is, I think, the most visually compelling and well-directed of the entire franchise. That is the same with John Glenn in the 80s.
Right. Robert Wise, I think, was an editor before he became, directed Star Trek: The Motion Picture and West Side Story.
You go with Star Trek: The Motion Picture, not Sound of Music.
Sound of Music, that's right. No. So, and Sam, what's your? Take us back. You were born one stormy night. Start there and then work your way up to how you got to
barn
this
in
table.
Kentucky.
In a barn in Kentucky.
So I came out to LA in 2014, and I did the standard aspiring screenwriter route of writing as many scripts as possible and submitting them to contests. I was top 50 in the Nichols twice. I got a bunch of contest wins. And it was through one of those contest wins that a guy we all know, Cameron Cubison, shout out.
Mm-hmm.
That guy's great.
Yeah. He knew that Addie was looking for somebody to write a horror movie, and he passed along one of my scripts to Addie. It wasn't even a script that had won a contest. I just reached out to him for thoughts on the script. And without knowing it, he passed along to Addie, and then one day I wake up and there's an email from Addie freaking Shankar in my inbox.
Sam writes gold, by the way.
Yeah.
It's gold.
Yeah.
But I kicked around trying to earn a living in Hollywood for years, and with a lot of frustration. I think I fell into the trap that I think a lot of people who come out here, especially young writers, fall into, which is I would do free work or work for very little pay for producers who never had any real ability to get something done, because anybody can call themselves a producer in this industry and try to impress a 25-year-old into writing a script for $500. I wasted years of my life doing that. And then, I got reps who really did nothing for me. And then they dropped me. And I think like a couple days after I was talking to Addie on the phone about like, my reps dropped me. What do I do? He was like, you want to come take a look at this show I'm working on? Which is just proof of what a freaking mensch Addie is. It's like I see this kid needs a little help, a little push, and it's looking back since then.
Addie was like, I'm putting together a team.
And then he was like, well, why don't you show up in the editing room and give Ken some notes on what he's cutting together? And then I mostly just started showing up every day. I don't think you actually asked me to do that.
No. That's the crazy thing. Like, I've just been like trying to give basically since I turned like 30, because the first part was like me working with like established people and like trying to learn from them, right? And then I was like trying to take those learnings and like give people opportunities the way I was just kind of given opportunities, and
But you have to seize. People have to seize them, and I think that's one of the lessons that I had to learn by mistake over the years, of where I wasn't taking advantage of what were actual opportunities in front of me. It wasn't until Guardians of Justice where I was just like, I'm going to make myself important to this show.
Yeah,
I'm going to keep showing up until they give me an actual role in the process.
Yeah,
and Ken's so good because he was just like, I guess you're my boss now.
And just, I mean, you kind of went down the same path, right? Like I was just kind of like, I hate the world. And I was like sitting there, and then like a bunch of like suits came over, like 5 suits like came in, and they're like, are you okay? And I'm like, yeah. And then like, they're like, yeah, we have this guy who wants to show you something. And then you come in with a laptop and you show me like storyboards. I'm like, oh, that's sick.
Yeah, I had won the writing contest.
You'd run a contest,
you had sponsored with Screencraft, and I won with my Mr. Rogers script, and then I storyboarded it. There was a part of me that was like, oh, I really want to make this. I'm like, I'd love to be part of making it, because that was part of the winning the contest. And so I storyboarded, and we went over to Addie's house, and it was fun. And
and Ken, if you couldn't tell from this conversation, is the most optimistic human being I have ever met in my entire life. He was really one of those people who, like, after 5 minutes of talking to him, you're like, oh yeah, I could like fly to Russia and assassinate Vladimir Putin right now. I could save the world. Right. That's how good I feel.
Yeah. No. Well, I appreciate that. Thank you. Yeah, and so part of the Mr. Rogers short, I had like puppets. It was a kind of odd thing, and Addie's very good at like connecting things and ideas, and so he was like, "Oh, this guy might be good for my crazy superhero show." And so,
but the point that I was trying to make, I guess, to anyone who is listening to this about you, is you showed up. Like, I was completely checked out. Right? I was like, who are these suits? I don't remember their names. Like, who's this dude? And I think you describe it as, like, you were meeting Topher Grace from the Ocean's movies.
Yes, Ocean's 12 particularly. Minus the totally destroyed hotel room. But the essence of that.
Yeah, and I'm not like, there are no drugs or anything, but I'm just kind of like, I'm just, so done with everything.
And mind you, this is like, I'm like, oh, I'm meeting Hollywood producer Addie Shankar. So I'm like in a tuxedo and got my folder and the storyboards.
And I'm like, hey, who are you? wait,
Yeah.
what is this about? Like, who are you people? You guys like, I'm John. We've known each other for 4 years. I'm like, oh.
Yeah.
And it's such
Cool.
an important skill for anybody in this business to have, to be able to walk into a room where the other people in the room don't care who you are and don't even necessarily want to have that meeting with you.
Mm-hmm.
Because how many times, I'm sure you've had the same experience, where you walk into a meeting with some executive and it's like 3:00 on a Friday and they've had 20 meetings with writers or directors exactly like you.
Right.
And the last thing they want to do before they head home for the weekend is talk to another goddamn writer.
Well, what I was dealing with at that point was just I
boundary issues. Yeah.
You know, because I was trying to like help people get their careers off the ground.
And this was in your condo, right?
Yeah. This was 2016.
2016. Yeah.
This was 2016.
Yeah, wow.
So I'm there, and I'm like sitting there, and I'm just so burnt out with feeling like I'm trying to help people, but having to like throw the ball, run down the field, and catch it for them. You know,
Mm-hmm.
and you're like, dude, what am I doing? Why? And then you just showed up like an angel, and you're like, I've got this. I can just do this all. I'm like, oh. And then you just kept doing what you said you were going to do, which was like a novelty at that point in my life. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no,
Because I was like trying to work with, and look, part of it was also like guilt, you know, because I just showed up to LA and boom, it started happening.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, wait, this is not everyone's experience? You don't just like
right.
show up and then
Yeah,
like,
you should feel terrible about
Yeah.
that.
and
by
I was
the
just
way.
like,
You just
and then,
jackass.
and I'd just be like, oh, yeah, I was just, you know, talking to this guy, and then next thing you know, Brad Pitt was doing the movie, and then we were on, and it was like just that.
Right. I had the exact opposite
And
experience.
then I was like trying to, like, kind of pay it back or forward, I don't know, something.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, okay, but like, why are the cameras not showing up? You know what I mean? Like, why did the production designer decide to like start a band between the yesterday and today and like not come? Like, why is there no set? Like, you know, like, I'm like, I'm not equipped for this. I don't know. And I like, I'm like, maybe I just don't know how to talk to millennials. Cause I was like, I dealt with like kind of another generation before this, and I knew how to talk to that generation. It's like, maybe I don't know how to talk to millennials.
Yeah. Whereas we're both old souls, so
Yeah.
that's
Right.
why we get along so well.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, no,
Like
it's
when we
awesome.
say, hey, let's meet at 2:00, you guys show up at like 1:55.
Yeah.
Like,
We showed up at 1:45. I will have you know.
yeah, no, or like whatever the
Yeah.
time is. You're like, the point is you guys are there.
Yeah.
Right.
Well,
and
I
that's
think
like the big.
Yeah, consistency, being consistent and reliable, because like I think that even with, you know, the notions of working in Hollywood or making TV shows or movies, that people perceive that it's like you're outside of the norms of kind of having we'll say a normal job. It's like, no, you still need to show up to work and do what you said you were going to do, and you clock in, you clock out. You try to. The great thing about this business is that you do have to invest creative
Right.
passion into it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you're not
And
just sleepwalking.
Totally. And I think that's, in some ways I did people a disservice because I created like a public persona that was like completely erratic and seemingly unreliable, but that's just not how I operated behind the scenes.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Right.
I was like a super professional. I showed up on time. I showed up early. Thank everybody. Like it just, I was genuinely grateful for all the opportunities, right? But the moment you put a camera in front of me, I would turn into like the ultimate warrior or like a professional wrestler and just act like a.
When I first told my parents that I was working for you and they Googled you, they then called and asked, does he wear that makeup all the time?
Yeah.
It's like, no, he's a normal guy.
Yeah, he's actually a normal professional
Right.
But
creative person.
I think one of the important things here is there's a lot of dysfunctional people in Hollywood, from actors, creatives, producers. I mean, we don't have to name names. You can read the news. And there are just not enough people who want to come into this industry to make everybody else's lives easier.
Right. What a great point.
And
Yeah,
if you
totally.
if you can show up to a dysfunctional TV show set or film set or production office, and instead of being the person who's causing problems, you're the person who is making the life of the people around you easier, you will succeed in this industry because everybody needs those people.
Yeah.
Totally.
And you're there to hopefully help solve problems for
Right.
people and to come up with solutions. And that's ultimately what your, we'll say, creative capacities should be kind of geared towards, is how can you, we'll say, be of value to people and to help them achieve the things that they're trying to achieve.
Yeah.
And also, you know, invest enough of yourself creatively into it that it comes through the production, but also maintaining the professionalism of what you're trying to accomplish, you know.
Yeah.
So
talent matters like only a little bit.
There's a lot of very talented people out there.
Yeah.
Especially now that we've had decades of, like, you know, the hearing about the multi-million-dollar spec sale and the overnight success. There's a lot of people who come to this industry with talent, expecting that overnight success. Some people actually achieve it, and we resent them greatly for it.
Yeah.
But
Fucking overnight.
But there's so many talented people who have flocked into this city, and you know, you cannot get by with pure talent alone. You have to have some kind of work ethic or other quality, and a lot of luck. Luck is always a part of it, but you have to have some kind of ability to make people want to work with you and keep working with you on future projects.
And it's fun because I mean, the luck factor is definitely a challenging one to kind of mentally accept. And of course, as you know, you get that luck by being professional to a degree, by working hard, hopefully getting good at what you do.
Networking,
because it is funny to think that, like, we're sitting here, well, for me, because I won a writing contest. Like, that feels super random, you know? Right. And the chances, in a weird way, of, you know, winning the contest, but also winning it with somebody who, you know, sees, you know, is not just oh, you won it, thanks, bye-bye, like, but sees, like, oh, you know, how can this, you know, person and these people kind of be incorporated into the stuff that I'm working on. Like, Addie's very good at knowing kind of where the parts and pieces, you know, fit together creatively he can form a Voltron, okay?
Yeah.
And so, but yeah, so there's that luck factor, and it's just like those and then of course, you know, it's the type of thing everybody talks about, but you do have to just commit and have perseverance and tenacity.
But yeah, I've won a lot of screenwriting contests.
Yeah.
I know a lot of people who have won a lot of screenwriting contests. Not a single one of those contests got me a sale or a job or got me in a room with the right people. I still had to force my scripts into people's hands. I had to, you know, go up to people and ask them to read my scripts. And you can't just accept the first level of luck of winning something or anything like that. You have to then force the next step.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then also just, I think once you're past that step, just realize that ego will just fuck you.
Yeah.
So the way I managed it was I'd like behave like an egomaniac on camera. I was like a character, right? But I'm gonna get it out in this vlog where I'm talking about how I'm the man. But do not bring that fucking energy in a real situation where you're collaborating with people.
And I do think that that's hard, especially for writers and other creative people, because we tend to be very, very sensitive.
Well, it's you.
Well,
you're sensitive.
I think a lot of creative people are sensitive, and I know for a long
sensitive is not a thing, because there's so many types of sensitive.
Okay, let me put it this way: has self-esteem problems.
Yeah,
and I used to mask that by being an arrogant piece of shit. And then I went to therapy and I worked through some of that stuff. And maybe I still come off as an arrogant piece of shit. You'll have to tell me. Yeah. But I know that hindered me, where people thought I was arrogant and full of myself, but it was really me having low self-esteem and like trying to put on what I thought a confident person sounded like in a room.
Totally, yeah.
And I wasn't getting the calibration right.
Yeah. Well, it's just
but it goes back to the whole thing about like, how are people perceiving you? How do they want to perceive you? And then step into that, Yeah. Like versus I'm going to play like a mind trick on people. It always backfires because then you come off as like a sociopath or a serial killer.
Right. Eventually people will, kind of see through things. So you want to, if you're going to do it, you have to be able to back it up with, actual ability to, hopefully do something.
Do you want to talk about your next movie?
Oh, yeah. Ooh. Yeah, I sure do. Boy, I sure do.
This is a great one. I'm like super pumped about your movie.
Thank you. How'd you
I'm like
that?
Pardon?
How'd you like that previz?
Dude, I loved it.
Yeah.
Dude, I'm so committed to helping this movie happen for you because I think you're going to knock this out of the park.
Oh, thank you.
I know you're going to knock this out of the park.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I would say it's a fresh, very cool spin on the crime cop genre in a brand new way, set in a world unlike anything you've ever seen before, with a protagonist who feels familiar, but also is something that hasn't been depicted on screen before.
Would you say that the protagonist feels a little bit like Oscar the Grouch?
It's like Oscar the Grouch.
He's being controlled. What you mean is he's being controlled by like unseen forces that are like manipulating him and putting words in his mouth.
Yes, whatever that definition is exactly what. So essentially, let's just picture the coolest action crime film you've ever seen with something that might resemble, we'll say, Oscar the Grouch. That might be kind of a good comparison.
So Oscar the Grouch did a lot of drugs, became a cop.
Yes, and has a lot of issues to deal with, and is trying to work his way out. But just like Michael Corleone, the more he tries to get out, the more they just keep pulling him back in. And so sometimes the only way out is through, and he is going to have to, we'll say, check where all of his principles in life lie while doing battle with ne'er-do-wells.
Who may also resemble beloved children's characters.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's just say that to a certain extent it's taking, I think, elements of Guardians of Justice, my Mr. Rogers short to some degree, and just, taking it all to the next level in a way that people have never seen before.
Yeah, it's a lot like there was a movie called Who Framed Roger Rabbit.
Yes.
Back in the day by Bob Zemeckis.
Yeah.
Who went on to do Back to the Future and
you say that like it's a movie that maybe they haven't seen before.
Dude,
there's a little scene.
Bro, movie. We're like not. I mean, I'm 37, so I'm kind of like, not. Like if there's a reference that's meaningful to me, it's not a guarantee that young people will know what the fuck it is.
Oh, that's true.
Today.
I once taught a screenwriting class to a bunch of college students who I was like, so let me use Jaws as an example. You know that scene in Jaws and just blank stare. Who's seen Jaws? Like 2 hands go up. Okay, what about Star Wars? Who's seen Star Wars? Maybe 5 of the 20 hands go up. It's like, screw it, Iron Man. We use Iron Man as an example.
I used to know.
We've derailed the.
I used to know. I used to know Taylor Lautner back in the day, like at the, like right at the dawn of Twilight. Mm-hmm. Well, no, not even the dawn of Twilight.
Of an oxymoron.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. No, I wouldn't say the dawn. This was like right as he was like becoming like couldn't walk into a mall because the mall would shut down.
Right.
We had this meeting. I asked him, "Hey, dude, we were just hanging out," and I was like, "What's your favorite movie?" And he said Taken. And Taken had come out like the year before, right? And he was a young dude. I mean, he was like 18, 19 at the time. But yeah, like young people, and it kind of blew my mind, right? Because I was like, oh, you mean the movie that just came out? That's your favorite movie? Mm-hmm. But then I thought about it, and I went, that makes sense, because like if you're, like young people, gravitate towards like what just came out.
Yeah.
Like my favorite movie is The Matrix.
Which came out when you were...
Because when I watched it, I was like, as I was watching it, I'm like, this is my favorite movie.
Yeah.
As I'm watching it, you know what I mean? I'm like in high school, I'm like, this is my favorite movie. It's been decided, you know?
Yeah.
If I was like 40 watching The Matrix, I wouldn't be like, wow, I need to rethink what my favorite movie is.
Yeah, it's funny because when I was in film school, they definitely did. Our script teacher asked us once, the whole class, and he said, "Who here watches a movie every month?" And the whole class raised their hand. You would expect that in film school. And then he said, "Who watches a movie every 2 weeks?" And like only half the class raised their hand. And then it went down to who watches a movie every day. And only me and another guy raised our hands. I was just like consuming like crazy.
I mean, I don't watch a movie every
Right.
day. That's a
lot. That's
sometimes
a lot.
you're busy.
Right. That's a lot. It's just that like, you know, there is that, you know, kind of like what we're saying, like the film history is important. But Roger Rabbit, I actually saw that in the theater. I still remember. I saw that in an old, really just, this was in the late 80s to date me. And it was just a mind-boggling experience to see something like that. And, you know, the mix of live action, animation, and all those type of things. So this project, if it's okay, I'll just jump back to it for a second, is take all of that and just ramp it all up in a way that's just, you know, a crime action film that really, one of the things that will separate it from, like, you know, other people who've kind of gone into these type of things is at this point it's never acknowledged the differences between, this is just a world that they exist in.
The puppets don't know they're puppets. They
the
don't.
Humans, all that. Like
there are no puppet jokes.
Yes, there's no puppet jokes. There's
no cartoon jokes.
It takes it. It is because I've read the script. I can say this. It takes the noir genre very, very seriously. It is very much a neo-noir detective story.
Yeah.
It just happens to have this other element grafted on top of it.
Yeah, yeah. And that's the thing that, like, in some ways, like, just from a creative approach that will, I think, set it apart from other things, is that we are existing in this world, and much of the aspects or issues that will be explored through some of this kind of crime action and this protagonist have to do with, you know, other issues, and that kind of relate to, you know, still relate to the puppet aspects, but also, you know, branch off into a little bit, probably a little more psychological issues.
Right. And I think when you're saying originally, okay, we want to make a neo-noir with puppets, the first question you have to ask yourself is, why?
Right.
Other than it'll look cool.
Right.
Other than it would be fun to make, why do you do that? Why do you choose puppets as opposed to, say, cartoon characters or claymation or any other thing that you could put in here? And, you know, you have to think about it thematically, right? You have to think about, okay, how are people pulling the strings in this world? How are people controlling other people? How are people, you know, what is a puppet but something that is manipulated by someone else?
Right.
How do you bring the concept of a puppet into a neo-noir in an interesting way to justify that choice? And I think you've done a great job with the script and bringing it to that place.
Thank you.
It's brilliant.
Yeah.
Your animatic's great.
Thank you.
Where are you? Do you want to talk about where you are in the process, or is that like a me thing?
I'd say I'll put that on. I would say more of a you thing.
Where am I in the process?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I am. I'll say I'm in pre-production, storyboarding, animatic. I've really kind of leaned in. Like, Addie and Sam both know that I love the storyboarding process. When I was a kid, I wanted to be a comic book artist, and it kind of just like moved into movies. But so right now it's a lot of fun.
To specify though, you're not just storyboarding.
Right.
You're shot designing.
Right.
Yes.
And it feels like a cross between like a old school filmmaker shot design reel and a modern Marvel MCU animatic previz thing.
Yeah.
What's the software you're using?
It's Backlot. I'm going to give Backlot a shout out here.
You should get a free subscription to it.
Well, they have been very, I'll say, accommodating to things. I think it's still kind of in the beta phase. But when I saw that, I was like, because it incorporates 3D elements, 3D environments. It's kind of, we'll say, like the Unreal Engine type thing, but probably a little bit easier to use and very, very filmmaking centric. And then I incorporate it with my storyboards. In a weird way, it scratches a bit of an itch that I love because it combines writing, directing, cinematography to a degree, editing, and storyboarding, and then just the kind of full experience. Because I like to, and you guys have seen the previz stuff, but there's one thing to do previs where you're kind of showing people this is kind of what it'll be. There's another thing that hopefully makes people get lost into watching it, and you're like, wow, I kind of feel like I was actually just watching the movie, and you can get a really good sense from the tone and the emotion of what this is going to be. So that's where I'm at in the creative process, is figuring a lot of those things out right now.
And the beauty of that is this is a massively complicated technical shoot in terms of the different elements that need to be both real in the same physical space on the set and then composited together. Mm-hmm. So the fact that we already know exactly kind of what major sequences are going to look like is, I mean, that's going to save us so much time and money. Yeah.
And I also like to remain, even as much of my, we'll say, kind of previs planning, all those things, I always like to remain open creatively. Sam and Addie are incredible collaborators, and I just think that like when you kind of go into it with that level of like figuring out a lot of that stuff, then it opens to when Addie's like, hey, what about doing this? Or Sam is like, this, I think, story element might be an interesting thing to explore.
It's cool because we get to like do what would normally happen in post-production before even before anything's happened. Mm-hmm. So it's really cool.
See some of the stuff I'm working on
when the stakes are lower.
Yeah.
When literally the stakes are lower, right? It's not like we've got a gun to our heads, and it's not like we've got like a network yelling at us like, Addie, it's a year late. Right. What's wrong with you? You're doing it again.
We have never ever delivered something a year late. I want to assure the viewers, we always come in on time.
Yeah,
no,
it was COVID's fault.
Yeah. No, exactly that. It's like it's a cool, fun place to explore. I think that pre-production generally, it can be very, very tedious and boring in a lot of ways. Like we all want to be on set making a movie. When you're on set, there's like, depends on if you like the set experience.
I much prefer being in the editing room.
Yeah,
but
when you're in that kind of, there is a certain intensity that's happening, and you have to kind of think of things and make it work.
I want to be as far away from actors as possible.
Right. But going into it with as much just kind of a clear plan allows you to then go when you need to go. You know what, this could be better, or Addie's got an idea, or whatever. Like how kind of far you can go to make that adjustment, and still kind of, in a sense, the structural aspects of what you've created are still there, but you can be flexible and redecorate along the way.
Totally.
Yeah. And I think that like I am familiar with a lot of software programs, but I don't have a desire to be a 3D artist, but I definitely see the like incredible asset of understanding some aspects of that. So this program particularly, and there might be others like it, I don't know. But this one particularly was like the learning curve for me was like, I figured it out very quickly, and then I was like, oh, this is really cool. And then I was like, the only thing, I'm not a big fan of like the 3D characters acting things out. Like I like to draw it, because then I can feel like you convey a little bit of the personality a little bit more. And then I just used the audio from Writer Duet, the script reading thing as actors, and it actually worked really well. So anyway, I'm very excited, and obviously want to take keep this party rolling along, because we really had a lot of fun working together on Guardians of Justice.
And I should say, if anybody wants to see like an example of Ken's talent as an illustrator, he drew and animated the episode 7 title sequence.
Thanks,
Oh, yeah.
man.
Guardians of
It's so
Justice,
good.
which is, if you've seen it, resembles 1960s Super Friends.
That was.
aesthetic.
Can I just talk about that for 1
Yeah.
second? Because I was flattered that you guys entrusted that with me. Entrusted me with that because I was flattered to be asked to.
It was mostly just like we had no freaking idea what we
Right.
were doing with this title
Desperation
sequence.
brought you to me, but I was like, I'm gonna run with this. And the opening credits for episode 7 of Guardians of Justice, I animated over the course of probably 2 weeks, just on I have an XP pen and used. I think I actually did it in Clip Studio Paint because they have a really good animation. They actually have a very good frame by frame animation thing, and I was like, and it's not overly complex. I'm not going to put it up to like what Angry Metal or anything like that. Like they're doing very complex camera movements.
Angry
and stuff
Metal's
like
the animation studio that
Yes.
did like 90%
geniuses,
of
Yeah.
total geniuses.
the
But
animation on Guardians of Justice.
But what's interesting about it though is, I was looking at, I was thinking about what this title sequence could be, and I was looking at Super Friends, and I was like, you know what? Their animation is like 3 frames.
right.
It's like character in this position, character in this position, and you just cut between them. It's not, or a still drawing of the character moving across a background.
Right.
Yeah, and none of the people in the background are moving.
Right.
So
I was watching the Super Friends Spider-Man and His Amazing. I was watching the Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends episode with the X-Men in it, and it's just frame after frame of the X-Men just standing there, like this.
And in your mind, it's moving in
Yeah.
this weird
But
way. Yeah.
because we, as a society, as an audience and a culture, have this memory of these kinds of 60s and 70s pieces of animation, we can use that as a creative choice to cut corners and save on money and animation, because the audience accepts that style is like that. And I think that's one of the lessons we learned on Guardians of Justice, is that if you can find a style that is simple intentionally, you can get a lot of creative value out of very simple things.
Yeah, and because like even though you're using probably a more, we'll say, rudimentary form of animation, you're homaging something from 40 years ago, there's still, like Addie's saying, like there's still very kind of simple basic techniques that you learn when you're doing it, and it kind of all funnels back again to the filmmaking process, because animation and working in that kind of realm definitely teaches you a lot about even stuff you would do live action wise, or definitely from a visual effects perspective, because you're thinking in layers, and you when you look at an image, you're not just seeing a flat image in your mind. I'm looking at Addie and I can see Addie's there, the microphone's there, the background's there, and your mind is starting to After Effects that situation and go like that. So animation definitely helps you kind of play around in that mental space, or creative space. So no, thank you. I tell everybody, I'm like, I got to animate the opening of episode 7, so.
And now we haven't told you, but we are doing an hour-long Guardians of Justice special that you have to animate yourself in that style.
I will 100% do it.
all one medium.
I will lock myself in a
Just
room.
that,
and I
the
will
most
make sure.
subversive thing we could do is just not change mediums.
Yeah.
Just like still images of all the characters' mouth flapping.
Yeah. So, but yes, and so thank you, for. Addie, I don't know if there's anything you wanted to add in terms of the project we're working on.
No, I just my agent has the script and the animatic, and then we're gonna start. I think it'd actually be kind of like a fun thing to give updates on it. Every time we
Absolutely.
we met with Mel Gibson,
Yeah.
and him and Ken are not BFF.
We actually maybe could get Mel Gibson at this point.
It's the character is a.
We talked about Mel Gibson.
Grizzled,
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Mel Gibson as the voice of
Well, in the script,
Ragazzo actually could
as
work.
the Mel Gibson as Oscar the Grouch.
I actually described the character as Martin Riggs-esque with Oscar the Grouch. And
How canceled would we get if it's just a voice?
I don't think you get canceled for casting people, dude. Or do you? I don't know.
I think it depends on the person. There's a sliding scale.
Yeah.
Well, I'll say this: like, it's a great role and,
For Mel Gibson.
Yeah, and I think that there's a lot of great roles in the script.
You do have to operate the puppet, though. That's the thing.
Well, that's going to be something probably fresh and new in a way that people haven't necessarily seen before. So whatever you're expecting by this pitch, trust me, it's probably going to be even more mind-blowing.
Yeah. Cool. Well, I guess that concludes our first podcast.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Well, okay.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Fuck
That's
yeah.
great. Thank you all for watching or listening to the inaugural Bootleg Universe podcast. We hope you'll stick around for future installments in which we'll discuss our creative process, how we've made certain projects and shows, and try to give you some advice about the state of Hollywood and how to make a career in this crazy industry.
Yeah.
As much as we have.
Yeah. Don't forget
a tiny amount.
Yeah. And don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, ask us questions, hit the bell for notifications, and come back for more Bootleg Universe filmmaking podcasts.